Okay, so whether it's your local coffee shop or a massive warehouse, you've probably seen labor unions all over the news lately. I mean, after decades where membership was kind of falling off, they are suddenly a huge part of the conversation again. So, what's driving this big comeback? And, how do unions even work? Let's break it all down.
All right, let's start with this quote. It's from Liz Schuler, and she's the president of the AFL-CIO. That's the biggest federation of unions in the entire country. And what she says here really gets to the heart of it all. It's about demanding the rights and the democracy on the job that, the law is supposed to promise everyone. And this really frames the whole mission of the labor movement today.
So, why are unions making such a comeback right now? To really get it, we've got to look at who's leading the charge and what's fueling this new wave of organizing.
And a great place to start is with Liz Schuler herself. Her story is actually really telling. Her dad was a power lineman, a proud union member. But then, when she started working at the very same company as a clerical worker, she saw a totally different side of things. She realized pretty fast that non-union folks just didn't get the same respect or the same pay. And it was that moment, seeing firsthand the difference a union makes, that power of having a real voice on the job, that really lit a fire under her and launched her into a lifetime of organizing. So what happened to Liz Schuler? Well, that same story is basically playing out all over the country right now. You're seeing workers at some of the biggest companies out there organizing, and they're demanding the basics: better pay, schedules you can actually plan your life around, and safer working conditions. But to really get why it's all happening now, we've got to take a step back in time. We need to go back to the very beginning. Okay, let's hit rewind. The story of unions wasn't born in an office. It was forged in factories during a time of massive, massive change. And really, it all came down to a fight for basic human dignity. I mean, just try to picture it. We're talking late 1800s, early 1900s. For a lot of people, work was just grim. 60-hour work weeks? That was normal. A minimum wage? Nope, didn't exist. Workplace safety? Pretty much an afterthought. So when you're facing conditions like that, banding together isn't just a good idea. No, it was about survival. And this timeline here really shows how the whole movement grew up. It kicked off with these big, broad groups like the Knights of Labor. But then things started to get more specialized. You had the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, and they focused on skilled workers, your carpenters, your electricians. But that left out a huge group of people, the factory workers in mass production. So that's where the CIO came in, organizing entire industries like auto and steel. Eventually, in 1955, these two big players realized they were stronger together. And boom, they merged to create the AFL-CIO, the massive federation we still have today.
Okay, so workers are getting organized. But here's the thing. Their power, how much they can actually do, has always been defined by the law. It's kind of like a pendulum. The relationship between labor and management swings back and forth, all depending on a handful of really big landmark laws.
So first, in 1935, you get the Wagner Act. This was an absolute game changer. For the first time, it gave unions the official legal right to exist and to bargain collectively. It even set up the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, to be the referee in disputes. But then, just 12 years later, that pendulum I mentioned, it swings hard the other way with the Taft-Hartley Act. This law put some serious restrictions on unions, and the big one, the one we still talk about all the time, is that it allowed states to pass right-to-work laws. And what that means, in simple terms, is that you can't be required to join a union just to keep your job. Okay, so we've got the history and we've got the laws. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What's the union playbook? How does this all actually work on the ground? All right, the absolute heart of everything a union does is something called collective bargaining. It's really just a fancy term for a simple idea: strength in numbers. Instead of every single employee going to the boss one-on-one to ask for a raise, the union negotiates one single contract that covers everybody. This contract covers wages, hours, benefits, you name it. And that collective power, that is where a union gets all its muscle. But, not every unionized workplace is set up the same way. The contract sets the rules. So you've got a union shop, which is the most common. There, the employer can hire whoever they want. But after a certain time, you have to join the union. Then there's an agency shop. In that case, you don't have to officially join, but you do have to pay a fee because, hey, you're still getting all the benefits the union negotiated. And finally, there's the open shop, where joining the union and paying dues is totally 100% voluntary. And this map right here, This is where that Taft-Hartley Act we talked about gets super real. Remember those open shops we just mentioned? Well, every single state you see highlighted here has passed a right-to-work law. And what that means is, by law, every single workplace in those states is an open shop. As you can probably guess, that makes it a lot harder for unions to organize and keep up their membership.
So what happens when the talking stops and negotiations break down? Well, that's when things can get pretty tense and both sides start to turn up the pressure. On the union side, you've got strikes, where workers just refuse to work. You've got boycotts, asking the public not to buy the company's products, and picketing, of course. Now, management has its own playbook. They can do a lockout and stop employees from coming to work. They can hire replacement workers, often called strikebreakers, or they can go to court and get an injunction to try and force the union to stop.
Now, to try and avoid all that high-stakes drama, a neutral third party will often get involved. The first stop is usually mediation. Think of a mediator as kind of like a referee or a couples counselor. Their job is to get both sides to keep talking, to listen, and to maybe make a few suggestions. But, and this is the most important part, a mediator has zero power to force anyone to agree. They're just there to help.
Okay, but what if mediation doesn't work? Well, then you move on to arbitration, and this is a whole different ballgame. An arbitrator isn't a counselor, they're a judge. They listen to both sides, look at all the evidence, and then they make a final decision. And here's the kicker. That decision is legally binding. Both sides have to accept it. End of story.
And all of this brings us right back to where we started today. Because even though that basic playbook of bargaining and strikes is over 100 years old, the issues on the table now, man, they have evolved in a huge way. Just take a look at this list. We are way beyond just arguing over an extra dollar an hour. Today, people are negotiating about the huge gap between what a CEO makes and what the average worker makes. They're talking about pay equity, about support for childcare and elder care. They're talking about critical safety issues like preventing sexual harassment and bullying, and even mental health support. It's like the entire definition of what makes a good job is up for negotiation.
So when you boil it all down, the playbook might be old, but the game itself is always changing. This new wave of organizing we're seeing just proves that the fundamental human desire for a voice, for a little fairness, and for some basic dignity at work, well, that's timeless. And as technology and our society keep evolving, the really big question is still out there. What is the relationship between employees and employers going to look like in the future?